Предстои ни 15-минутна презентация на един много атрактивен наш гост-лектор, който се надявам наистина да ви хареса. Той се нарича Питър Бродски и е от SoundCloud, като ще ни говори за Pitfalls and Windfalls и по-скоро how to or how not to launch a startup. Той по принцип говори много добър български, макар че презентацията му ще е на английски, за да разчупим малко атмосферата и се надявам, че за всички вас ще е много интересно. Затова искам да поканя Питър. Заповядай.
So, there are two kinds of talks. There are theory-driven talks where you present a rational argument with logic. And there are data-driven talks where you show evidence and data and probably a couple pie charts. This talk is neither of those. This is going to be a cartoon-driven talk. So, startups are risky. One-third of VC-backed startups fail. All the hard work you did, all the money you raised, gone. 4 years of your life, gone. One-third of VC-backed startups break even. Maybe you return investor money, but there's not a lot to show for it. And one-third of VC-backed startups generate a real return. It could be a modest return, and very, very few of those will generate a real return. And that's VC-backed startups, by the way, right? So if you're not venture-backed, 9 out of 10 of you are going to fail. Those are just the statistics. So you might be wondering if it's a good idea to do a startup. And I actually think it is. I think now is one of the best times to do a startup. Sure, the economy isn't doing that well, but the tech space and entrepreneurship in general is a sector which is doing really, really well. It's the one segment of the global economy that seems to be doing pretty well. And as you heard, there are plenty of investors that, if you have a viable idea, you're going to get investment. And the fact that the rest of the economy isn't that great actually is an opportunity, right? Startups exist to find solutions to problems. And, if you think that one of the problems in the economy is that there aren't enough good programmers, which is a problem that I think exists, you can go out and create a startup which teaches people to program, which is exactly what Code Academy did, which is a great company. So if you think there's something wrong with the economy, you can actually start a startup to help fix it. And the other great thing about doing a startup right now is that tech wasn't always cool. Just a decade or two ago, girls wouldn't talk to you. You didn't get much social respect, and that's really changed, right? You can hardly open a newspaper without hearing about Apple's latest gadget or Google's latest phone. And it's not just that, for once we get a little bit of social respect, but the media is interested in us as well, right? Which is great because they're there to help you tell your story to potential consumers, to potential investors, and they want to hear your story. So now is really not a bad time to do a startup. When you hear startup, you think of Silicon Valley, and that's been mentioned a couple times at this conference already, and we're obviously not in Silicon Valley, we're in Bulgaria. There are a couple of really great advantages to being in Bulgaria, I think. For one, there's a tremendous amount of unique talent, right? You don't... Some of the best programmers that I know are actually here in Bulgaria. And I think the reason for that is in part due to the education system. The higher education system in Bulgaria lets you do what you want, in essence. If you want to learn, that's great, you can do that. If you don't want to learn, nobody's there to make you. So that's very different than the higher education system in the US, where even if you already know something, they're going to make you do hours and hours of homework, which means two things. First of all, it means that you're not going to have time to pursue those things which you don't know. So you're not going to have as much time to learn new things. But it also means that if someone's done well in Bulgaria, and if you're hiring really talented people, they've done well because they know how to be self-motivated. They know how to be self-starters, and that's exactly what you want in a startup. So talent here in Bulgaria, in some ways, is predisposed to the startup environment. The other good thing about Bulgaria, it's not just that you have the big fish, small pond advantage, right? There's not a lot of competition. There are not a lot of other startups. which is true, by the way, right? If you have a viable idea, it's relatively easy to get above the noise here in Bulgaria. There are not thousands and thousands of startups all competing for investor attention, all competing for media attention, all competing, by the way, for one of the most important things, which is the talent that you're going to need to start your company. And because it's such a small ecosystem, it's very well knit. You can even meet the Bulgarian president, which good luck doing that in the US, by the way. That said, a lot of startups fail, right? And that's what I want to talk to you about, in the hopes that you can avoid some of the common mistakes that a lot of entrepreneurs make. So one category of mistakes is vision, right? Vision is hard. It's your own idea. It's hard to get perspective. And the more you look at it, the weirder it gets, right? You're so close to it that you can't really get an objective view. And you need to ask yourself whether or not the way you see yourself, the way you see your company, the way you see your product, is the way that other people see it as well, right? You may think that in 2012, the world needs another social network because there's no particular social network that solves your particular itch. But you need to ask yourself, are you alone in that? Are you letting your bias sort of get in the way of your vision? You need to ask whether or not other people see the world the way you do. Sort of another common problem with vision is the misapplication of a great idea in the wrong context, right? A good idea is only good if you apply it in the right context. So, there are conferences like, say, TechCrunch 50 in the US, which are great, but they presuppose scale, right? They presuppose that there are thousands and thousands of mature startups, and you can pick 50 of them that are going to be interesting, and then you can have TechCrunch 50. You can't really do that, say, in Bulgaria, where the scale is smaller. It's not going to work. I challenge you to find 50 mature, interesting startups. It's a different scale. So what works in one situation won't work in another. And it's not about disadvantages, it's about knowing the right environment. This is a really common mistake, but a lot of people make it anyway. You take on a vision which is fundamentally too ambitious. It's monolithic, it's mammoth. You want to accomplish world domination in one step. Which means that you won't have anything to show to investors, to customers, even to your own self, in fact, for a very, very long time. That's a recipe for failure. And it's a recipe for failure because it takes a lot of time to build your vision, even a simple vision. Which brings me to timing, right? For a good idea to be good for a startup, it oftentimes has to be a little bit ahead of its time, just a little bit. And you're going to get a lot of resistance to your idea, presumably, especially if it's a good idea, because people won't yet get it. So you need to know when people are resisting your idea because it's just a little bit ahead of its time, or whether or not it's not a good idea. And it takes a certain amount of courage to do that. On the other hand, and I just want to go back to this example really quickly. I want to give you one example with, again, Apple. They had the Newton and the iPhone. One was a tremendous failure, one was a tremendous success. And what really differentiated those two is the timing was right in one case and not in the other. So you really have to get that timing right. So another kind of timing is when you rely not on the market as a whole, but on individual players in the market. So let's say that you're building a feature that is going to be great if you're a smartphone user. You're either going to be incredibly lucky or incredibly unlucky. Either one of those companies, either Apple or Google is going to buy you. Or they're going to just add that feature without you, and they're going to clobber you because they've got scale and you don't. And you don't want to set yourself up for a situation where you could be at the wrong place at the wrong time, because sooner or later, you will be. So timing. Timing gets into things in another way as well, in terms of execution. It's very easy to execute slower than you want to for a couple of reasons. You could get lost in the details, right? Instead of delivering a rough draft, version 1.0 of your product, you can get so obsessed with perfecting the tiny little details of it that you could lose track of time. Maybe you made some bad hires, right? Maybe the people on your team just aren't working fast enough. But what happens most of the time, I think, is you wake up one day, read something in the news, you panic, and you change course. And you're not changing course, really. You're not really zigzagging. You're resetting the clock. You're starting over. So it takes a certain amount of courage and discipline when you read something in the news and think that one of your competitors is overtaking you to stay the course. On the other hand, if you rush, right? If your goal is to beat the clock, you're going to do a bad job. Your execution is going to be shoddy. Your product isn't going to be very good, and you're going to imprison your company in a really bad product where sooner or later you're going to have to start over. The fastest way to get the job done, I think, is to take your time. Get it done right the first time. You don't want to ruin your vision with bad execution. Another way to ruin your vision is inherently as a founding member of your startup. You're going to be better at some things than others. So I'm a programmer at heart, and I know very little about marketing. So if I do a startup, I'm going to be really interested in programming. But that doesn't mean that the other functions of your company aren't just as important. Marketing, PR, development, design, customer service. You can't favor one of the functions of your company more than the others, even if that's where your core competency lies. You have to treat the company as a whole. And the way to do that, of course, is to delegate, is to find great people to do those things that you can't do. And let go. Trust them to lift up your company. Which doesn't mean, of course, that you need to let go completely. You're going to be one of the hardest working people in the company. It's just the kind of work you're going to be doing is different from the work that, say, your employees are doing. You're going to be managing the vision. You're going to be tweaking it. You're going to be tuning it. You're going to be making sure that the people you hired are executing your vision. And the other thing that you're going to be doing that absolutely nobody else can do for you is fundraise. We talk a lot about runways, when we're starting. How much runway do we need? How much runway do we have as a function of how much time in the bank do we have? If you don't raise enough money, you're going to run out of runway. You're going to have to shut shop, and your company's going to shut down. On the other hand, if you raise too much money, well, that's no good either. And it's no good for a variety of reasons. First of all, there are certain projects that you could take on if you have the resources that you can't take on if you don't have the resources. And you might think that that's a bad thing. But that's actually a good thing, because that's a good way to keep yourself out of trouble. It's a good way to prevent yourself from taking on projects which are too ambitious. And you don't want to give away your company for nothing. You don't want to raise more money than you really need. So you need to calculate how much runway you need. The thing is, it's going to take longer to get to where you want to go than you think it will. There are going to be obstacles along the way that are completely unknowable and unforeseeable from your current vantage point. Part of that is going to be execution. Part of that is going to be revenue models. They all look good from afar. When you get to know them, they're going to disappoint you. The pipeline is going to take longer. The conversion rate is going to be lower. Your start date is going to be later. And if you get into a position where you're running out of money, you're going to start making short-term decisions at the expense of long-term strategy, ultimately accelerating the demise of your company. So you want to always make sure you have enough runway. So I've talked about money, in terms of funding, but you're not just taking on investment, you're taking on an investor. This is a relationship that is going to last the life of your company. It's not a relationship you could back out of. You're getting married, for better or for worse. And a bad investor will do to your company what a magnet will do to a compass. A bad investor will steer you off course, but on the flip side, a good investor will help you with vision, with strategy, possibly with biz dev. And what makes a good investor for you is fit, right? There's no brand to this. You have to make sure that your investor gets your vision. And if the relationship doesn't work out, relationships in startups are unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen in a relationship in a startup. Startups will do to a relationship what two dogs will do to a sock. If ever there is a way, they will ruin it. And when you think about the co-founders, and you do need co-founders, you don't want to go into this alone. If you don't trust your co-founder or co-founders to do a good job, then instead of doing your job, you're going to be looking over their shoulder, getting in their way, and not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Or the other way around. They're going to be looking over your shoulder, which is really annoying, and they're not doing their job. And if it turns into open conflict, well, that's just as bad. You're going to tear the company apart, you're going to demoralize the team, and nobody's doing what they should be doing. You need to be you need to be a unified team, unified management. Because you guys are going to be the ones with the most at stake. Your investors, they've invested in a whole bunch of companies, but this is your company, your only company. So when your employees don't do a good job, you're going to be tempted to fly in, dump all over them, make a lot of noise, and then when there's backlash, leave. And that obviously is not a good approach, which isn't to say that you need to be hands-off either, right? You want to be very actively involved with your team because you guys are a team. You need to help them execute their vision. You need to help them understand what they can't do and help them do it. You can't count on them to solve your problems. And they, by the way, can't count on you to solve their problems. There has to be work, real effort, real Real team spirit across the entire team, a single team. Sometimes, though, you'll make a bad decision, and you'll hire the wrong guy. An employee who's not working out right now isn't going to work out later. You need to fire, and you need to fire quickly. A bad employee is going to bring down morale. It's going to bring down your company. So the last thing I want to talk about is recovery. Because there's an infinite number of mistakes to be made. You're going to make a lot of them. And I think what being a good entrepreneur is about, in part, is recognizing when there's a problem and fixing it. You can't play the problem down, right? You can't say, oh, it's not that bad. It's actually probably worse than you think. And you're always in sell mode. You're selling your investors, you're selling your customers, you're selling your team because you need morale to be high. When there's a problem, you need to stop selling. You can't paint over it and pretend that there's no problem. Which isn't to say that you need to just go after some knee-jerk response, right? It's not to say that you've got some instance, some manifestation of a problem, and that's the real problem. You need to make sure that you're not focusing on the wrong thing. Rarely is it the case that a single problem stands out and casts a shadow over the entire company. It's usually a series of events. It's usually a culture of accepting problems, and that's what you usually need to fix. If you don't, then by the time you've realized what the issue is, it's probably going to be too late to fix the problem, and that does you no good. I want to wrap up by saying that success is really not a straight line. It's very hard to get from where you are to where you want to go without making a ton of mistakes along the way, making a ton of course deviations, and that's normal. And even if the worst thing happens, right? Even if your company fails and you have to shut shop, you are still probably going to be more fundable after that experience than you were before if you've really done a good job. There's an interesting symmetry between your career and the company you build. You build one in terms of the other. Nobody's going to make you the CEO of their company right now, unless you've got a ton of experience. But you're creating that position for yourself. And if you enter your company with the intention to learn, with the intention to emerge stronger and wiser and more employable, then odds are you've left everything on the field and your company's going to do better because of it. So I've told you about the pitfalls. I'd love to hear about your ideas for Windfalls. I'm a mentor at Launch Hub, so definitely want to hear your ideas. You can come talk to me after the conference or shoot me an email. И между другото, ако предпочитате да говорим на български, ще ми е удоволствие.